We know that people gather. We know that people even gather to drink. And it even garners various mentions in rabbinic literature. But what do we even know about this term of gathering, Havurah, in rabbinic literature? That's something we're going to explore in the 112th episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. So I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest to the show, Professor Orit Malka. Welcome, Professor Malka.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Malka, still, not yet a professor.
Okay. All right. Dr. Malka. Okay. So for those less familiar with Dr. Malka, she is a researcher of Talmud and early Jewish law. Her research focuses on the political aspects of Talmudic Halacha and its historical context, and the study of early Jewish law is a key to understanding important legal political trends of antiquity. Orit earned her PhD from Tel Aviv University, where she wrote her dissertation on the notion of testimony in late antique rabbinic law. This year, in the 2021-2022 academic year, Dr. Malka is a postdoctoral fellow in the Taube Center for Jewish Studies at Stanford University. Go Cardinal. And next year, we'll be joining the faculty of the law school and the Talmud department at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. So, Dr. Malka, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
The topic we are discussing today is about, well, it sounds kind of, I mean, it's almost like Havurah in Tannaitic and early rabbinic literature. So first of all, how did you get interested in studying this topic?
Okay, great. So we talked about the term Havurah, and I organized my thoughts around this idea through the term. But when I started thinking about it, it wasn't through this term, it was through the notion of getting together. So also in the Rabbinic Judaism as we know it today, but especially in the early Tannaitic materials that I study, there comes a lot the concept of people doing things together, like rituals together. And the classic example is Zimun, Birkat HaMazon. It's an individual obligation. Everybody has to do that. But then they also have, there are rules about doing it together. And I started, and interestingly enough, there are some parallels between laws of testimony that refer to witnesses having to do things together and Dinei Birkat HaMazon, which refers to people reciting Birkat HaMazon and the way they have to do it together. And that really caught my eye. What's going on there? Those are two totally separate worlds of content, you would assume. But this notion of acting together seems to occupy the rabbis, and that's how I went on this path. And I realized the concept of Havurah was key, so that's how this project emerged.
So like collaborative group rituals.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Collaborative is maybe one way to put it. I'm still looking for the terminology. It's some kind of a joint action. That's how I think about it.
Yeah. And so I do realize we have different types of listeners, some who are very familiar with Talmudic stuff, some less familiar. We're talking about the first couple centuries of the Common Era, right?
Right. Tanaim, okay. So you can say 1 to 3rd centuries of the Common Era.
Yeah. Okay. So we have that. And just for the listeners, how we got connected was Dr. Malka presented a paper on this topic in December 2021 at the Association of Jewish Studies conference. And I was like, this is a drinking conversation. So I got very excited. And actually, I think a few texts that we're not even talking about, but this is how, I don't think I shared this with you before, Dr. Malka, but this was on my radar as drinking stuff because of a few brightot in the early part of the 10th chapter of Pesachim, B'nei Chabura Shahayu Mesubin Lishtot. There's people coming together to drink. That's Pesachim 101b. On 102a, we have a couple of brightot. One, Chavarim Shahayu Mesubim Lishtot Yain. People are coming together to drink wine. And later on the page, B'nei Chabura Shahayu Mesubim B'kadesh Alehem Hayom Mavin Lo Kos Shel Yain, blah, blah, blah. So it's Friday. They're all drinking together. Let's bring more wine now that Shabbos is here. So for me, this was on my radar because of these brightot, these early rabbinic texts in a chapter chock full of lots of drinking texts. And so that was an intersection for me. I'm like, these are drinking texts. But actually...
Well, you got great intuitions. Those are really very important texts to understand what Chavurot are, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also really funny because like that first one, Pesachim 101b, they are drinking. Like they came together specifically. That's what they're doing. Although it's interesting because in the text you share with me, where this appears in Mishnah and Tosefta, we don't see necessarily a lot of drinking as the focal point for these groups, the Havurah.
Well, in many of the situations, in many of the settings, there will be a cup that somebody is pouring. So, for example, if in the Tosefta, there is a very nice parallel to all those varieties that you now cited in Tosefta Brachot. Here, it's 5-3. You remember your baraita with Kadash Aleim Hayom, Bnei Chavura Shayu Mesubim Kadash Aleim Hayom, and there it brings up a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, whether or not you can say you have to stop for Shabbat to say the Kiddush in the middle of this drinking party, really, but in the middle of this meal, let's call it this way. And then there's this exact same halachic question: do you stop for Shabbat, or do you continue your meal until after it's dark and only then recite the Kiddush for Shabbat? And the setting here is Orchim Shayu Mesubim Etzel Baal Habayit. So the Tosefta hides the fact that it's a Havurah setting, but it's really the terminology Baal Habayit, Orchim veBaal Habayit, those are the terminology for symposium. That's what we will find that's hidden behind the concept of Havurah. And you see there is a cup there. Umazgu lahem et hakos. And this cup will keep on coming. And in those varieties that you cited from Psachim, you also have the two cups. So those are ritual cups that are part of the symposium of the drinking party, and they give in the fact that the drinking party is going on, even when it's not called Ayu Mesubim Lishtot. You don't have it that spelled out.
Formulation,
but you do have it with the cup that's being poured. And this is a ceremonial cup. It's part of the symposium's cups that are being poured there.
I was saying in the Mishnah Tosefta, very rarely does drinking come up.
Yes, so I'm saying you have it there in the Mishnah Tosefta too with this cup. The cup there that they're mentioning, they're discussing in the context of Kiddush. You're thinking, oh, this is not a drinking party cup. This is like a holy cup for Kiddush. You drink grape juice for this cup. You don't even drink proper wine for this cup, right? But this is a misunderstanding that we have. And actually, a lot of the halachot about the Kiddush are formed against the background of people dining in a drinking party. And you catch it through the verb mesubim. Okay, so what is this mesubim? We know it from Pesach, right? Shayu mesubim. But actually, it's the terminology that characterizes the way you would sit in a symposium. It's another word that gives in that a drinking party is in the context. So the Chachamim are mesubim, and they are discussing things and drinking, and a cup of wine comes in, and it's Shabbos. It's time for the Kiddush. So what are we going to do now? Will we recite the Kiddush, or will we stop, shall we continue with our meal? That's the kind of halachic question that they're asking.
So can I throw something out there? I've never heard anybody else say it, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Could we translate mesubin as symposing? Like they were engaged in a symposium? Is that possible?
It's a very good suggestion, I think. The mesubim refers to their bodily posture. They're reclining. But yes, it's a token. It's synonym with symposium. So you're getting it right.
It's like a quasi homonym too. It sounds very similar. And I wonder if here's why I think this. Because very similar to like tricline, right? We have this word tricline, which is basically a triclinium. So even though I don't know if they necessarily exactly sat in a triclinium, but it was the rabbinic triclinium, which is a tricline. So I wonder if maybe this was sort of like their version. When they're doing mesubin, how much is that not necessarily just about the choreography of them lying down, but also about how they're speaking, what type of activities they're engaged in?
I think you're absolutely right. Okay. And the rabbinic version of this, like you say, it's very rabbinic, but it's also very similar to the original. So, for example, the mesubim in the Tosefta, you have the discussion of the three couches. Keitzad seder hasava. It's back there in chapter 5 of the Tosefta Brachot, and it describes the three couches that are the structure of the triclinium, which is the setting for the drinking party. So, absolutely, yes.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah. So in my mind, I would say mesubin is not exclusive to how people are laying, but also characterizes the content of the conversation, I guess.
It characterizes the context of this drinking party. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It says that they're not just okay, they happen to be reclining. No,
Right.
they are reclining with the glasses of wine in front of them, and there are 3 couches in that room, and they're doing what you do in a symposium.
Yeah. All right. So since I know you've studied a lot of this, I'm going to throw some observations out from the Mishnah and Tosefta sources you sent my way, and I'm super curious to hear your thoughts. So for those taking notes at home or keeping score at home, this word as Havurah, Havurot, or B'nai Chabura appears either, depending on how one wants to count this, either 11 or 22 times in the Mishnah, and either 25 or 47 times in the Tosefta. So, but a high concentration in both Mishnah and Tosefta surround Pesachim. Mishnah Pesachim, Tosefta Pesachim. A lot of it is concerned about the eating of the Passover offering, the Passover sacrifice. Most of it, there is a lot of consumptive activities around it, but it's eating, not drinking. But I mean, if you're going to eat, obviously there's drinking involved, which I mean, it's true. I'm not being, entirely glib about it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, observations about this term, this phrase in the Mishnah and Tosefta?
What my study was, I tried to map the different uses of this term in Mishnah and Tosefta, and I came out with 3 rather distinct uses. But this distinction is a bit misleading. They actually have something very, very common to all 3 of them. Mm-hmm. So, do you want us to start with the distinction or with what's common?
Let's dive right in. What are the 3? Yeah.
All right. So among these 3, the first, like you said, in quantity is Chavurat Pesach, the Chavura of Pesach. And it's really, like you said, they give in very little in terms of drinking. It's mostly concentrated with how you get counted for a sacrifice, for a lamb that you are going to sacrifice. You need to have your portion designated in that animal. Mm-hmm. And it's about how you count to the group of people, the Havurah, that are going to sacrifice a specific lamb. And then how are they going to dine together the sacrifice meat? Okay, so it's about preparations for that sacrifice and the meal that's going to follow. And you could suggest, and I think it's pretty straightforward, although we might need some corrections, that the Leil Seder is basically the feast that follows this sacrifice. So we know that the rabbi, in the time of the rabbis, there was no longer a temple, so all that were left was the feast. But there are good reasons to assume that even in the days of the temple, after sacrificing, they would have a feast that would be like a symposium. And a lot of scholars have noted the similarities between Leil Seder and the symposium. That's where it's the most clear. So that would be one context. So you do have a feast, including drinking there in the background, but a lot of the laws are concentrated in what precedes that, how you have the animal, and what is this relationship between the people that are part of this Havurah. That's one context. And then there is another context that appears in Tosefta Megillah, Chavurot shehayu b'Yerushalayim. It's kind of a story.
I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, I know. But actually, the big drinking doesn't happen there. You should know it happens with the other Havurot. But anyway, so these guys in Tosefta Megillah, yeah, you were going to say?
Oh, I'm excited because there's a Beit Mishteh in there. It's a drinking house.
Right. There's a drinking house.
It only appears 10 times in the Tosefta, and that's one of them. Right.
And I really enjoyed your nice chapter on the Bet Mishteh. It was very nice.
Thank you.
And so the Bet Mishteh is a drinking house or a drinking place or a drinking event, like you suggested. and those Havurot, those associations that we're told of, they're described in historical terms, right? There were the associations in Jerusalem. We assume it's in the time of the temple. A lot of scholars think that they are a long forgotten memory for the rabbis. They don't no longer have them. And those associations were people who enjoyed both drinking parties in a lot of forums, by the way, not only in the Bet Mishteh, but also in the Bet Avel, and also in various occasions, if it's marriage parties or ceremonies of grief, they would drink either way. But
just as a side note, one thing I realized, especially going through the Mishnah and Tosefta material, although it could even include the verse being quoted in Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, is the only thing that was different between a Beit Mishteh and a Beit Avel, a mourning house and a drinking house, was the mourning. That was it. They're drinking in both places.
Right. And actually, so it was noted by some scholars say, okay, these guys are going there and doing some communal volunteering, right? They go to places where they're needed. And so they go to help the people, the mourners, or people who have newborns, etc. But actually what they do in all these forums is the same thing. They enjoy a drinking party, but apparently their presence there is of importance. So it's in the culture of the time, this drinking party is not, it's a very formal drinking party to some degree, it's a very important drinking party, and it has its rules, and it has texts that you would recite in those drinking occasions. Yeah.
So, and you mentioned it seems like a distant memory. So this is being stated by Rebbe Elazar bar Rebbe Tzadok, and this is what, a century after the destruction?
It's
later.
It's this, something like that. But but the thing is, Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Tzadok is mentioned. Some scholars think that he actually remembers a lot of good traditions about Hasidim Rishonim, about those early tzaddikim of the times of the temple, and the Havurot shayu b'Yerushalayim are part of those tzaddikim Rishonim. This is the perspective, how it's been usually looked at scholarship, as like these are really like
they're
very
long
Hasidic
gone, faded
guys.
Memories.
Yeah, but also exclusive groups of righteous people. It's not like a popular thing, this emphasis on drinking, you would think everybody would want to be there, but the terminology there, Havurot shayu b'Yerushalayim, suggests it's not something that everybody would do. Those are exclusive associations of righteous people, and some suggested that the entire construction of Batei Knesset has originated with these kind of circles, exclusive circles, and that it was first an exclusive practice before it became widespread and open to all the people of Israel. The matter of exclusivity here is doubted, but we should mention that. And of course, there is the other exclusive Havurah, the association of the Chaverim, those that are very strict in Tum'ah v'Tahara. They keep the purity laws very strictly. They are also called Havurah, although we can say something about that too if you wanted. But let's just put them in the same category of these exclusive Havurot or exclusive Chaverim. And what's interesting about those is that they seem to be fixed over time. If you're in this Havurah, you're in it for a while. And in the context of keeping the purity laws, we have also laws about how are you going to be accepted to one of these Havurah. You have to take it upon yourselves, and the other people of the Havurah have to accept you into the Havurah, and then you become a member, and it's a long-standing membership. This is not, and this membership is a key to comparing the three Havurot that we talked about. So we talked about Havurat HaPesach. You're a member, but it's a very short-term membership, because once you sacrifice, it's gone, and next year you can be a member of a new Havurah. This is a long-term membership here in this Havurot shayu b'Yerushalayim, or in the Havurah that keeps the purity laws. And the last and most relevant to your show, Havurah, is the symposium. So, this is really an ad hoc Havurah. You get together for a drinking party. This event is called a Havurah. Some of the sources, when talking about Havurah, refer exactly to this setting. So I think that the clearest example, if you wanted to mention it, is from Masechet Derech Eretz. I don't know if it's in this, in here.
Lo yishlach adam lechavero.
So look at the setting. It begins with this recommendation. Lo yishlach adam lechavero chavit shel yain, v'yiten alea al pi hashemen, shezo derech mikta. And then comes the story. There was a story about this.
I just want to translate for those less familiar with Hebrew. So someone shouldn't send a wine barrel to his friend and put oil on the I guess the spigot maybe, or in the because this is the pathway of death. This is the way of death. It's definitely a bad. It's a bad move.
And then read the story, translate the story.
Sure. All right. So Maaseh Ba'adam Echad She'asa Mishte Livno. So there was an instance in which one person made a drinking party for his son. Kevan Shabal B'nei Havurah V'Hesebu. So people B'nei Havurah, so Havurah members came and they
Right.
symposed. Nichnas lahavi lahem shemen. So someone brought oil. Ra'et chavit shehi malea yain. So someone saw that it was a full barrel of wine. Chenek et atzmo vamit. So what Chenek is?
Strangled
Oh,
himself.
yeah.
It's the Baal Habayit. It's the host here. He has his guests. He wants to bring them wine for the meal, but he's so embarrassed once he sees that the barrel that was supposed to be full of oil is actually full of wine. He only put a little bit of oil at the top of it, and he's so embarrassed that he strangles himself and he dies. And that's why it's so dangerous to never put some oil on top of your barrel of wine, because you might die.
So that's what it means, the mouth of it. It doesn't mean like at the spigot. It means at the top of it.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. From where you pour it.
Okay.
I don't know what would be the English term for this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, it's a very naive story about a symposium. Nobody would suspect anything else is happening here, right? It's a drinking party. And the members are coming and reclining or symposing. And we can look at another source in Tosefta that demonstrates how this reclining is really the beginning of the actual symposium. In the description of Seder Seuda in the Tosefta, we have actually two phases in the meal. First, they come and sit.
Sorry, I'm still traumatized by the story. So someone put oil on top of it? And he was embarrassed?
Yeah, I don't know if maybe it was a good way to preserve the wine, you know, or maybe to hide the wine. I don't know exactly what's the purpose of putting this little bit of oil at the edge.
Okay.
But it's
right.
Yeah, it's a very exaggerated reaction, you would say, right?
Yes.
Strangle yourself. Yeah. But he was so embarrassed he couldn't take the embarrassment, so he strangled himself. Yeah. But anyway, just to say that the verb behesevu and they reclined and they symposed, like you suggested, is the key word to describe the part of the symposium now begins. Like they came in before and they were getting together, talking, and then there is like the key for to start the symposium. This is the reclining, which shows up here. And this is just to demonstrate this third use, which is a very important use that people have not noticed before. A lot of times when we talk about Bnei Havurah, we don't talk about some designated group or designated members of a fixed group. But this is an ad hoc Havurah. It's a symposium. That's why it's called Havurah. They're called is a Havurah for the sake of that single party. That's what makes them a Havurah.
You're saying this is even more ad hoc than the night of Passover?
So in the night of Passover, if you connect it to the sacrifice, then it's not. Then it's there's like a couple of days at least that you are a member of that Havurah, because you pick the lamb, you count yourself with the other people, and then you go, you sacrifice, and then you eat it, and then you're gone. You're good. You can go. But here, it's just we don't have the sacrifice part. It's just a part.
It's even more short term. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and this last category of Havurah, symposium, is that there is a very, very nice parallel from the Evangelion according to Mark, where in part of the description of Jesus feeding the 5,000, there's a miracle. Jesus is teaching he's going with his disciples somewhere. It's supposed to be a foreign place, and then a lot of people follow him to learn his Torah, and he teaches them all day, and then it's the evening, and they're hungry, and all they've got is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And he says, well, we got to feed these people. Let's put them down to sit, and they made them sit down. They made them recline. The text actually uses a verb that shows the reclining, and it calls it symposia. Now, what does this symposia means? It means chavurot. And this is no fancy setting of fancy drinking party. It's just people getting together and sitting on the floor on the grass to eat their very simple meal. But it's called a symposia because Havurah, technically, as a technical term, designates a symposium, an eating group, a dining group, and that's a very important use because it actually conceals a lot of laws that the rabbis have designed, especially for the symposium. And it's not, it doesn't have to do only for very fancy symposias like the Pesach, but even a very daily symposia. And we can talk about that more if you wanted.
You're talking about the daily symposium?
Yeah,
sure, go for it.
Yeah, so I feel that this is one of the big surprises that was for me when I went through this project, is this concept of the daily symposia, what the rabbis are doing. So first, you have the symposia as a drinking party that is not an everyday event. I mean, even if it's daily, you still have to go to the drinking party, to the Bet Mishteh, or bring in the wine, or get the servants to serve the wine, to show somehow that it's a drinking event that's not just a regular meal, right? But the rabbis seem to have abstracted the notion of the symposium to include many settings of people eating together, even if they don't have all these additional characteristics of, the conversation and the ritual and the servants and the wine, etc. Once you have this, they turn it into an abstract concept of Havurah. So when you dine with other people, and this is and we will talk in a second about what does it mean to be with other people. But when you dine with other people, then several rules will apply to this meal. So, so one concept that I like to find here is about the bracha. When do you recite? You eat. It's a meal, so you need to say bracha. But if it's a sympathetic setting, then one will say the bracha for all the group, and they distinguish between settings when the person would recite the bracha. Each person would recite the bracha for himself, and other settings when one would recite the bracha for all. So we should look at that. It's in Mishnah Brachot 6:6. Once you realize what the word Havurah means, it means a symposium. You'll find references to the concept of Havurah, even when the terminology is not used. First, we need to look at Tosefta 4:8. This way it will be clear. כיצד סדר סעודה? אורחים נכנסים ויושבים על גבי ספסלים. So how is the order of a meal, you can say? The guests are entering and then they're sitting on benches and on על גבי קתדרות, on chairs until they all enter. And then, I'm skipping a little bit, they're pouring the glass, okay? So here you see it's the drinking is starting them off even before they are reclining. Someone is pouring the glass. כל אחד ואחד מברך לעצמו. Every person that got his glass is now saying the Borei Gefen, the blessing over the wine, for himself. And then they're getting some appetizers, and each one of them is saying the blessing for himself. Alu vehesevu, once they recline, okay? And here starts another phase of the meal, of this very ceremonial meal. And they're going to wash their hands again, and then they are going to get more wine. מזגו להם את הכוס. Someone is pouring the glass for them. אף על פי שברך על הראשונה, מברך על השנייה. Even though they already said the blessing on that first glass that he drank when they were sitting outside, they now have to recite the bracha again. And this time, I'm skipping a little bit more, אחד מברך לכולם. We don't need any individual to say the blessing for themselves, but one will say the blessing for all of them
together.
Right. So you see here the distinction between the two phases. נכנסים ויושבים, when they enter and they sit on chairs and on benches, versus what happens when they recline. Once they recline, עלו והסבו, it's the second phase of the meal. We have drinking happening in both parts of it, but the nature of the drinking changes. If it happens in the first phase, well, each one of these guys is just drinking for himself, and they will say the bracha for themselves. But once they're reclining, they are drinking together. Right. This is when the real party begins, right? and אחד מברך לכולם, one will recite the blessing for all of them. So in the Mishnah Brachot 6:6, you have all this beautiful party concept without the terminology. It doesn't tell you it's a Havurah. It doesn't tell you it's a symposium. You only get it very, very thin, right? But it's the same setting. The distinction is between what happens once they were sitting, which is the first phase, and what happens when they were reclining, which is the second phase. You can now look at the following stage of what happens in Tosefta Brachot 524. And you need to read it vis-a-vis Mishnah Brachot Vav 6.6. So like we said, in Mishnah Brachot 6.6, there are two phases of the meal, right? One when they are Kol echad ve'echad mevarech la'atzmo, everyone recites the blessing for himself, and one when they are echad mevarech lechulam. And here it is in Tosefta Brachot 524, 10 people that are dining, even if they eat from, they're walking, these people are walking along the way. They're not just sitting and eating. They're going on the road. You see it in the English, right? The English gets it right. 10 people going on the road. Even if they all eat from one loaf, but they are walking, once they sit to eat, so here those are people along the road. You wouldn't call it a drinking party. You wouldn't call it a symposium. But the rabbis are they're turning the concept. They abstracted it. So now they're dining together, and this is when one will recite the blessing for all.
I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in. If you enjoy rabbinic literature, well, I got a treat for you. Next week, we've got Dr. Ilana Stein-Haynes. So here's a sneak peek into that episode.
What I hear sort of dripping here is the sort of Greco-Roman emphasis on aesthetic. Wisdom and aesthetic are part of the same thing.
That they should correspond.
They should correspond to each other. If you're wise, you should be beautiful or handsome. And if you're ugly, think, physiognomy. If you're ugly, it means bad things about you.
I hope you enjoyed that sneak peek to next week's episode. Now back into this episode with Dr. Orit Malka.
This is a beautiful, beautiful halacha, which is one of my favorites, on Havurah of Pesach, right? So these are the people that have been counted together in one animal to bring it as one lamb for the sacrifice of Pesach, and now they're eating it. So two groups that were eating in one house, two Pesach groups, two Havurot Pesach are sitting in one house. Well, let's read from the English here. These turn their faces this way and eat, and these turn their faces that way and eat. They have to look away from one another. They shouldn't look at each other's direction. And the boiler is in the middle. So it's some kind of a warmer. Is it a hot water? Yeah, I don't know if it's a hot warmer, but anything. It's something that both parties would need. Oh, it warms water. It's a water warmer. It's a water warmer, according to this phrasing, yes. But I don't want to... So the important thing is both parties, both Havurot, both companies would need it. And then, when the attendant, it's actually an attendant of one of the two Havurot. We will hear it from what follows. So each Havurah apparently has its own attendant, and the guy comes to that warmer or to the mecham to pour limzog. It should do something with the wine actually, and not just water. But forget it, or he needs the water to mix the wine or something. It's about the wine in some way. Oh, wow. He's going there to this shared warmer, and then קופץ את פיו ומחזיר את פניו עד שמגיע אצל חבורתו ואוכל. He closes his mouth and turns his face until he reaches back to his group. It's an amazing description, right? Yeah. He must avoid swallowing, really, because you eat and there's some food in your mouth, and you walk in that room, and then you're gonna see the other group once you're eating, and that's a problem. You cannot look at the other group and eat at the same time. You have to wait until you get back to your own Havurah to swallow and to eat. And why is that? Because the rabbis have this idea that when you look at each other while you're eating, you're actually eating together. This is what brings you together. And in the context of Pesach, there is a special law that you are not allowed to mix two Havurot. The two Havurot have to stay separate, and you have to eat the Pesach within the limits and the framework of your own Havurah. And if you will go now to Mishnah Brachot 7.5, you will see the parallel in an everyday meal. So the whole chapter talks about Birkat HaZimun. Birkat HaZimun, we don't designate it to any ceremonial meals necessarily. It's just about three people dining together, right? Yep. And here the Mishnah discusses the what happens when we have two Havurot in one house, exactly like the setting of the that we saw in Psachim. שתי חבורות שהיו אוכלות בבית אחד, the same situation, but the halachic question is different. בזמן שמקצתן רואים אלו את אלו, הרי אלו מצטרפים לזימון, if they can see each other, they combine to a זימון, and if not, אלו מזמנים לעצמן ואלו מזמנים לעצמן. So they are actually engaging with the same question, yes? People dining together in one room, what brings them together? What makes them into one group, a unified group, in a way that has halachic ramifications? For Passover, the ramification would be you're not allowed to look at this other group because you have to stay separate. For everyday meal, it's fine. You can look at the other group, and then you will become one group, a united group, and you will recite the Zimun together.
It's also fascinating how different they are. In the Pesachim 7, it's a lot more defensive. Here, it's a lot more, there's a lot more opportunity to form a larger Zimun, which is an opportunity.
Yeah. In Pesachim, there is this specific rule that says, lo totziu. So there is the rule about the Passover, lo totziu et basar min habayit chutza, in the verses from Exodus. And the rabbis say, what do you mean, don't take the meat out of the house outside? It means don't take the meat out of your Havurah. So, and they say it's not about taking it out of the house. If you were eating in one place and then it was raining and you have to move, you can move and you can eat in another place. It's not a problem. But you can't eat with another Havurah. This would be a violation. And the Havurah, as the framework for eating the Passover sacrifice, is the legal principle that they are sticking to. And they have this general concept of Havurot when they're eating together. So that's what I said about the shared. Like I said, we spoke about three distinct meanings of Havurot: Passover Havurah, which is a short-term membership; the exclusive Havurot, which is a long-term membership; and the ad hoc Havurot, which is a symposium, the shortest occasion. But in all these three settings, we have meals, which are drinking parties, really, because they're all in the setting of a symposium. And in all of them applies this principle of once you see each other, you're eating together. And this idea of being together with somebody else in your meal is associated with the Havurah in all the three settings. And it's a very, very serious legal idea that comes from a very convivial context of, drinking together with somebody else. So we all know this feeling of intimacy and friendship that when you drink with somebody, and well, at least I hope we all know it, and we should know it. And
maybe some of us have been missing out in the last 2 years. In this. I don't know.
Right. That's definitely true. We all have been missing out in the last 2 years. Yeah. But this concept that we know from everyday conviviality is a legal principle for the rabbis, and they are playing on that in their different laws regarding Havurot.
So what's the connective thread between the three?
So again, you notice immediately that all three are dining, right?
Oh, this is but isn't there did you mention last when we were on the phone of the Latin, Greek,
the conviviality?
Is this the convivium?
Yeah, convivium is the Latin and the symposium is the Greek and the Havurah is the Hebrew. They both have a double meaning, but I don't know if this is what you were referring to, which is just nice to mention. Yeah, it's very nice to mention that. And they both refer both to the drinking party, the setting. For example, in the Hebrew, you have it in Chavurat Mitzvah. Sometimes you have Chavurat Mitzvah, right?
In Sanhedrin.
To Ben Sorel Moe, When and this is about the meal. The meal is called Chavurat Mitzvah itself, not the members of the dining group.
Yeah.
But in other occasions, like when we saw Bnei Havurah and even with regard to Ben Sorel Moe, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin has it, Achal b'chavurat mitzvah. If he's dined in a chavurat mitzvah, he's exempt, exactly. The Tosefta goes and says, Ad sheyochal b'chavura shehu kayotze ba. He's only going to be a Ben Sorel Moe when he eats in a chavura that he's like, now they're referring to the same thing, but the Tosefta talks about the group of people, because shehu kayotze ba, that he is like them. He needs to be eating with people that are like him, like bad guys. But the Mishnah refers to the Chavurat mitzvah as to the meal itself, right? So you see that in the same use, in the same context, it means it carries both meanings. And this happens also in the Greek symposium and in the Latin convivium. They all have that double meaning because they refer to the same social institution.
Oh, wow.
And what, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so I was going to say, back to the question that we talked about before, what is the shared meaning of all three categories of Havurot in the Tannaitic literature? They are all dining, and their meals are symposium style. So it is the joining together in a symposium style dinner or drinking party that is the link between those three categories of Havurot. And this shows you how core this idea was for the rabbis. It's not just, okay, when you have a drinking party, then you do it this way, but really most of the time you don't do drinking party like on your everyday. It's like the exception. No, this is not an exception. This is actually a very, very serious thing about a rabbinic way of life, if you want.
Hey there, I wanted to see how you're enjoying the episode so far. If you have any feedback, comments, questions, anything, please let me know. And also, if you have topics as well as potential guests, including, who knows, maybe yourself, please let me know. Feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Thank you, and now back into the show. You mentioned this was part of a project. Where did you, I don't know, what's the product of the project?
So the project has multiple phases. First of all, it's a collaboration with Dr. Ayelet Leibzon from the Herzliya University in Israel. And like I said, we were after the idea of joining together with someone else, with other people, with a group for the performance of ritual. And this was actually it's an article that we will hope will be published soon in Hebrew first, but then also in English. And it's actually the opening chapter of a book about this concept of joint action in rabbinic religion. And we have other kinds of Havurot too. We have them in the context of minyan. Okay, you count people to say the prayer. How is it connected to those early Havurot, those different Passover Havurot? If at all, and the rabbis take it to other places too. They talk about the value of learning Torah in a Havurah, and we could have looked at that as well. Surprisingly, it has a special value if you learn Torah in a Havurah. So you would think, well, maybe it's because you remember it better or something, but actually the terminology of the rabbis there suggests that something else is going on. Do you want to look at that?
Yeah, sure.
It's Nusach Bet, Nusach 2. It's chapter 8. It says here, when three people sit and engage in Torah together, the Holy Blessed One considers it as if they had become one unified truth before him. Okay? So it's this very interesting value of you. When you study together, the good thing is that you became one unified truth. You would ask yourself, why is being one unified truth of such value? For example, the two that sit and study together, when two people sit together and engage in Torah, they're rewarded. Their reward is secured on high. That's great, but you don't get to be a unified truth, which is apparently of some value for the rabbis.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to break in again, and if you have ideas beyond the show, beyond the podcast, beyond this video content, if you have ideas for what Jewish Drinking can bring you, whether it's, who knows, maybe it's Zoom sessions, maybe it's events, maybe, who knows, swag, please let me know. I'm very curious to hear from you, any ideas, things that we can do, things that I can bring you from Jewish Drinking. So feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. I'm happy to bring that to you. All right, now back into the show.
And now, and look at the other, there's a whole set of midrashim about Deuteronomy, Hasket u'Shma Yisrael, hayom hazeh niyata le'am. It's Deuteronomy 27:9. When Moses tells the people of Israel, listen, Hasket u'Shma Yisrael, listen and hear, something like that. Hasket means listen. And the rabbis are suggesting a midrash on this verse. What is it? Hasket u'Shma Yisrael hayom hazeh niyata le'am. They're asking, it means listen, Israel, today you became a people. And they are asking, why would they say that today they became the people? They've received the Torah, assuming that they became a people when they received the Torah. They received the Torah a while ago. Why are they saying, what does it mean? And the Midrash says, asu kitot kitot. So they take the word hasket and they divide it into aseh kita, which is nothing with the etymology of the word. It's all just about the
folk
way
etymology. Yeah.
Yes, right. Asu kitot kitot, form many groups, kitot kitot, chavurot, you could say, v'isku b'Torah, and study Torah. לפי שאין התורה נקנית אלא בחבורה, for the Torah is only acquired in a group. So the idea of studying Torah in a group, those are two sources, what we've seen, both the Rabbi Natan, and here it's of value for the rabbis. So, and those are just two examples. So
the power of group.
In terms of in terms of the project, that's what I'm saying. We want to learn the history or elaborate more about this idea of this religious value of doing something together with somebody else, being together with somebody else in small groups. We're not talking here about the whole people coming together, but being together with a small intimate group or a small Havurah that we suggest all derives from the setting of the traklin and the symposium and the drinking party.
Wow. Comes back to drinking.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know if I thought you were going to go down the road when you were talking about the learning Torah together, that it was somehow involved with the symposium and drinking.
That actually does involve, about
really?
שולחן שלא אמרו עליו דברי תורה, כאילו אכלו מזבחי מתים. Yeah. So the idea that dining together, right? You have to the study of Torah is like you said, the rabbinic style symposium. There is a conversation going on the table. It should be a conversation of divrei Torah, and this is the conversation of the symposium, the famous, ritualistic conversation that we have in Agadah shel Pesach, in the Pesach Agadah. There is actually an everyday version of this conversation, and that is the divrei Torah that you say on the table.
Dr. Malka, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. Before we go, is there anything you would like to promote?
I guess not yet. Maybe in the future.
Okay. All right. Dr. Malka, thank you so much. And l'chaim.
L'chaim. Cheers.